Okay. Hi, everyone who's just joining us. Welcome. I'm Lauren Cross, the Manager of Outreach and Public Programs at Public Art of the University of Houston System, and I'm really excited to be introducing this collaboration today. This is session 1 of the 2-part Soundscapes student workshop with Amos Cochrane. The first one is today, and then the next one is going to be presented in partnership with the University of Houston's Brain Center at the Cullen College of Engineering and College of Technology. So please note, if you haven't signed up for session 2, it's a separate registration link. I'll put it in the chat to make sure that everyone will be able to sign up for it as well, if you haven't already done so. So I'm pleased to introduce Amos Cochrane, who is an Emmy-nominated composer, musician, and sound artist. His compositions for film, theater, radio, and television have received many honors, and in 2020, he released 5 new albums and premiered work at the London Design Festival. Today's session is a masterclass with the artist, focusing on his trajectory and work leading up to his work Outside In, a composition commissioned by the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in 2019. Outside In, if you haven't seen it already, is currently playing at the University of Houston main campus as part of the exhibition Color Field, and it will be on view through May 31st, 2021. In today's session, Amos will also discuss other sound and visual projects that he is experimenting with. If you have questions, please use the chat to ask them or use the raise hand feature on Zoom. And without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Amos Cochrane.
Hey, everybody. Lauren, thank you for that fairly incredible intro. It sounds so nice and chronological and good when it's laid out like that. It doesn't feel that way all the time, but I do. I appreciate you guys having me. Thank you to Pepe for having me for this conversation as well. You know, our initial few chats have just been nothing but exciting. And so, you know, this is really cool to be here with you guys today. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to, you know, sort of have this conversation and see where it goes. You know, looking at the folks here, I don't think I did a color field talk a couple of months ago. So I'm going to try to not reiterate a whole lot of that, but also kind of hit on some of the backstory about me and about how I got to this point. Because really in 6th grade, I started playing bass and I just wanted to be in bands. And now I'm having conversations with Pepe about the brain and sound. And it's been a pretty interesting journey. So let me give you guys just sort of the shortest version of the progression. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about my creative process and then chat a little bit about some future ideas I have. And then I think Pepe and I will chat, and then I can open it up for you guys to ask questions, because I do like when things are as interactive as possible to move conversations forward. So, you know, how did I go from playing bass in a band in 6th grade to creating a sound piece that's living right now in Houston? You know, I that really was when I was in 6th grade, I started playing bass and just kind of got quite obsessed with playing bass. And really, I think it was more, I liked working with people. Like I liked being with my friends, and I liked creating stuff. And I can remember there was this moment, I think we were in high school, and it was just sort of this, we're in the garage playing, and there's like everything just felt, it's like the world felt perfect for just a second. And I will always remember this feeling, and I refer a lot to when I'm working, you know, getting back to that moment in the garage. And obviously I don't do that so much anymore, not in that fashion. I actually don't really play bass at all anymore. But those initial hangouts with my friends, it's definitely what sort of started this whole journey. And then that led to just, again, really playing in more bands up to the end of when I was a teenager and in college. And then my daughter was born when I was 20. And so it went from, oh man, I want to play bass in bands, which means be gone and be on the road and touring and all that stuff, to then all of a sudden I didn't want to do any of that, and I just wanted to be home. And so I was left with a little bit of a, well, how do I continue to do music, but also be home and be able to take care of my daughter? And so I thought, well, maybe I could compose music. It was sort of this very abstract idea at the time. I really didn't know what it meant, because again, I had just played bass and I had written a little bit of music for the bands, but you know, how do you move forward and how do you try new stuff? So I I went out and I don't know if you guys remember these little white MacBook Pro computers that the edges cracked after about a year. And then you'd send it to Apple and they're like, we fixed it. And then it would crack again. There was something so wrong. Do you get any of you guys remember this? There was something so wrong with those little white MacBooks, but they allowed me to start creating. GarageBand, which is a music making program, came on it. And I just sort of opened it up and went, well, what does this do? And what does this do? And at the same time, I had moved to a new city in Arkansas, and I thought there was a campus that was close to it, and they had a composition teacher. And I thought, well, if I'm going to compose, maybe I should take composition lessons. So I went and I knocked on the door of his office. I found him and I said, hey, I really want to take composition lessons. And he said, well, you can't just do that. You have to go to school. And I said, no, well, of course I can do that. Like, I want to write music and you teach composing music. Like, let's hang out. Like, let's work together. So he kind of looked at me a bit odd, but I showed up with a lot of stuff. And I think I kept showing up. Like, I kept knocking on the door. Like, hey, how about now? Can I take lessons now? And so finally we worked it out to where I enrolled in like a music theory. Also too, I didn't know music theory. I didn't know all that stuff, but I just knew I wanted to be able to create at home. So we did some things where I was able to get in and take official lessons with him. And so that led to a year of studying, composition in a little bit more of a traditional manner. And again, I couldn't read music. I really didn't know music theory, but it was computer programs. I mean, I had GarageBand and I had a program called Finale, which is a notation program where I could write in it and it played it back to me. And that's that's how I started to write. And when I was working with him, I wrote a piece for a symphonic band, which was, I don't know, probably 50 instruments, all music on the page. And again, remember, like, my creative drive came from this moment in the garage with a group of guys, and we were having so much fun and playing, and it just felt so good. Well, then I went to this symphonic band rehearsal, and it was like the worst experience I think I've ever had. It was so different than playing in the garage. And we rehearsed this piece. I think the piece was called Water Balloons, and we rehearsed it twice, and then we performed it. And it was like 6 months of work for like one of the biggest letdowns actually that I've ever had. And so I sort of had to step back and I said, man, this isn't what I want to do. I don't like this. And at the same time, I had been making a lot of just random music in GarageBand on the computer. And I put together a CD. You guys remember CDs? They're like circles and they're shiny. You could like burn them. So I burned a CD it was about like 25 tracks, and they're so bad. They were nothing. They were just ideas, like 30 seconds or 3 minutes of just stuff I didn't even know. But at the time I burned them and I was like giving them out to people. I recently found that CD and it's pretty terrifying to listen to that music. It was just so not, like, at this point I hear it and just kind of cringe. But a friend of mine, my cousin's wedding, I met a guy who lived in LA and he had a friend that was making a movie. It was sort of that quick story. And so I gave him the CD and I said, well, give this to your friend. And she called me and she said, hey, I have this short film. Do you want to score it? And I thought, well, yeah, yes, I would love to score it. What does that mean? So I dove into that. I worked with her. She had never made a film. I had never scored a film. So it was a really fun learning relationship. I think it took me 9 months to score a 9-minute film, which at this point is pretty hysterical. But I did it. Like, we did it. We scored it. It was great. And I liked the process more than anything, more than the score or the film. The process was more to my liking. It wasn't 100% like being in the garage again. But there was this back and forth. There was this running into a problem and going, oh, okay, that doesn't work. Why doesn't that work? Let's try some other things. And so then I thought, okay, I like this film thing. And also too, like, I'm sitting in Arkansas. And this is where I'm going to be. I'm not going to move to LA. I'm not going to move away. But thanks to the internet, I can work with people anywhere. So I then that summer met a buddy and he said, hey, another friend of mine scored a film in Arkansas. He's making a new one. You should call him. So I cold called this guy. His name was Daniel. And I said, hey, man, I see you're making a film. I just scored a film. I'd love to score your new film. And he said, great, great. Can you do 40s jazz music? And I had absolutely no idea how to do 40s jazz music, but I said, oh yeah, of course, let's do it. I can do 40s jazz. Let's go. And so he said, great, you have the gig. So I hung up the phone, and then I had to figure out how to make 40s jazz music in a couple of months, which after a lot of trial and error, and again, collaboration with the editor and the sound designer, and all of a sudden there was this little team that I was working with. And we were going, no, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. It finally worked. And we took it to the festival that the state had that year, and we won the festival. And so then that was it. I was like, okay, I like this. This is fun. I'm working with people. I'm meeting new people through people. And this, the process, it wasn't being in the garage, but it was working on a team. It was working together. So that's kind of what I then dug in, and that's what I decided to do because it kept me at home. And so I'm through that film, I met a lot of people and I worked on their things, and just that sort of process. You meet people that know people that are working on things, and you get together. So that's what I did for about 10 years or so, maybe less, something along those lines. But it was never, I wasn't playing in bands at all anymore. I was just scoring films and scoring commercials and basically anything that I could do. Anybody that needed music, theater projects, anything, I did it. So then I guess it was about 3 years ago, I had a pretty massive life shift happen as things come up in life and things change. And I found myself at a point where I had a lot of ideas. Like I had a lot of things I wanted to do, but time just didn't allow. I was a stay-at-home dad with my 3 kids at that point, and I was scoring films, and there was just a lot. I was having these small little kernels of ideas, but I would sort of have to put them over here on the table and then just score the films and then just take everyone to school or just be home with everybody and take care of stuff. And then all of a sudden I found myself with a lot more time on my hands. And I kind of thought, well, what am I going to do with that time? And again, I had realized that I had been kind of amassing these ideas over here on the table. And I was talking with my really good friend one day. He was a director that he had a film that he wrote that I scored that when it premiered at Sundance Film Festival a couple of years before that. And he's just a really good friend of mine. He had really kind of helped the journey of things. And he said, you have a lot of creative debt. And I thought, well, creative debt, that's like such an interesting term. Like let me dive into that a little bit more. So I realized I had all these ideas, but I had only just scored the films. I had only just kind of done one avenue of them. So it was about 2 years ago at this point. I said, I need to really look at these ideas I have, and I need to start working on them. I need to flesh them out. I need to do them all the way to the end so I can learn from them and then move on to the next thing. Because when you amass all of this creative debt, what happens is you don't give your brain and your thoughts new room for new things to come in, because all you do is end up going, oh yeah, but what about that idea that I never finished? So I really kind of set out the last 2 years on getting through the ideas, and that had to do with starting to release my own music that was not film based. I realized if I typed my name into iTunes, nothing happened, and that's kind of a problem. Like I should fix that, right? So I did. There was a film score that didn't work out, but I really liked the music. And so I went through the process. What is it like to put out a record or put out an album? Because everything's just digital at this point because vinyl is really expensive. So I started putting out records, and at the same time was starting to then write my own music. It was music that was not specifically for film. It was clearly inspired by film music just because of my process. But the music was mine. It felt like mine. And I wrote this longer piece of music called A Modern Procedure for Breathing that was a 9-movement piece, and I wanted to play it live. I didn't want to record it at that time. I wanted to perform it. And at this point, I hadn't performed live in probably 10, 11 years or so, with the occasional one-off, like, oh, the band has a reunion, let's go make up a bunch of stuff sort of thing. I had never played piano in front of people. I had never sort of everything had been sort of just playing at like a long time ago, playing at bars and playing bass. And so I did. I said I met some friends, and I said I've written this thing. I want to do it, and I want to do it in a space. I want to create a space for people to come to that they don't usually come to. So all these ideas that I had been having, this sort of creative debt, I was really starting to dig through it. And so we put on this performance, and we moved a piano into the space. I had a string player play with me, and we performed that piece, A Modern Procedure for Breathing. And that was, my gosh, I guess it was almost 3 years ago, because it was in the fall. I guess this fall it will have been 3 years ago. And at that moment, I knew that stuff was going to shift a little bit for me. I could not just sit and score films anymore. I had something else that I needed to share, and I needed to put out into the world for me, but also the reaction that I got from that piece was, after the performance of that, I had people coming up and they were just talking about how emotional it made them, and how focused they were on it. I mean, we curated this room to, there was nothing, it was just a blank room. There was nothing but the music. That was kind of important to me. I didn't want to play in bars anymore at all, because the focus is all wrong. But I felt like concert halls were slightly stuffy. And so there's this kind of in-between realm that I wanted to present in. And, I met the right folks and we made it happen. And just the response I got from that, though, it was the most honest thing I think I've ever made. And it was 100%, I did it because I wanted to do it, not to please a director, not to, make a film work. It was because Amos wanted to make it. And that was the first thing I had really made that was truly mine. And then again, the reaction that I got to it was really strong. As far as, I mean, people, they were crying, they didn't know how to respond at the end of it. It was a really interesting, I didn't expect that at all. And so what I started to notice when I would perform occasionally, because what I started to do at that point, I thought, I've got to start performing more. I have to flesh out some of this older music, like that needs to be a part of what I'm doing. So I started to see my career or my artistic path, or whatever you want to refer to it as it used to just be film scoring. And then it was like, okay, I want to continue to score the films, obviously, because that helps keep the lights on. But I also need to be performing. I need to be creating this new realm of stuff. And at that same time, I don't know if you guys ever go through these phases in life where you get in yes mode, is sort of what I call it. But when you start to do new things, when I start to do new things, at least, I get into yes mode, where someone's like, hey, let's do this thing. Yes. Hey, we should go to this thing. Yes. Like, let's go, let's do it. Let's see what happens. And when I was in yes mode, really shortly after that performance, I was invited to just kind of an artist hangout. And also too, I feel like there are these moments, I don't know if this happens, but there are these moments where you're sort of put in a social setting. You guys remember social settings too? All CDs and social settings, all these old ideas. I was I actually, a long time ago with the film stuff, I found myself on this boat. It was after the film festival that year. We were out on this boat together. And like that night on the boat, I met everybody I worked with for like 5 years. And again, with this artist hangout, I met everybody that I'm working with right now. And so at that hangout was, who has turned into one of my dear friends, Allison Glenn from Crystal Bridges. We didn't talk that night, but I talked about some things I was wanting to do. And then I liked this. I was starting to perform music again, perform my own music, and still scoring films. And then I had a random email from Allison that said, hey, we're doing this project at Crystal Bridges. I think you may be a good fit for it. And we want you to just create a sound piece. So I thought, let's do it. Yeah, I have no idea what that is, but I can do it. Kind of like, can you do 40s jazz? Sure. Can you make a sound piece? Sure. But it really tied into, when we started to talk more about it, it really was a good fit. In a sense, it was kind of like scoring the exhibition is sort of how the initial approach to it for me. But a really amazing thing happened on that piece, which this is obviously the color field piece that's now in Houston. But I started to work on it with Allison, and I didn't really know how to get started, because I knew it wasn't going to just be like a tune, like a piano piece. And I knew there was no score. I mean, they sent me sort of like renderings of the stuff that was going to be in color field. And so I had that to go by, but at the end of the day, it was kind of like, how do I make this different? This is what I started to do too. This was a very different output. So I've had playing in bars as an output. I had then had film as an output. I had, toothpaste commercials as an output. I had, now this sort of new performing with piano and strings as an output. So, okay, what is what I've now referred to as sort of like the museum output, or the art world output. So how, if I'm going to have a new kind of output, I have to approach this in a different way. I can't just, I'm not going to learn anything from it if I just make a piano piece and say, here you go. So Alice and I hung out a lot. I listened to her a lot. I asked her a lot of questions. And I started to learn about color field as an art form. And I started to look at Rothko's and Frankenthaler's and James Turrell's work. And I started to kind of dive into, okay, how are they, how has this been derived? Like, how did this come about? And I landed on this bit and talking about color not being at the forefront up until the color field artists. And then they brought color to the forefront when it was a secondary, supportive, the color was a supportive emotion. And then it was brought to the forefront. I thought, okay, how can that relate to music terms? So if we have a painting and the color is the lady's dress, but we're focused on the lady, and now we're just focusing on the color, how does that relate musically? So I thought, and at the time I had made a lot of film music at this point. And so there's sort of what I've gotten quite obsessed with, which has to do with sound textures more than melody. So I thought, well, there it is. If melody used to be at the forefront and sound texture was in the background, let's bring the sound texture to the front and lose melody for the most part. Let's make the focus of the piece a textural element as opposed to anything melodic. So that was it. That was like, that's great. So I sat down and then I just started to work. And just at the end of the day, I can talk about the creative process a little bit more in a bit, but I just started to make stuff up. I started to make up things, all sound texture based. I wasn't sitting there making up melodies on the piano. And so I remember calling Alice, and we had a deadline, because deadlines are the best thing in the world, thankfully, so we can actually get something finished. And I said, hey, do you want to listen to this? Because it was starting to get long. It was like I had made all these little pieces. I'd put them in a folder. Then I would put them back into Logic, the program I'm working in. And I was making this block of stuff. And I said, do you want to listen to this? Because again, I come from the film world where directors want to look at every moment. They want to find all the problems. So just my chemical makeup at that point was really more rooted in the film world, as opposed to I was making my own music. But at this point, Allison kind of felt like the director to me. And she said, no, just do whatever you want. And I was like, oh, okay, great. All right, bye. So I went back and I continued to work on it and continued to work on it. And then all of a sudden, this scene was like 25 minutes or something. And we were going to premiere it soon. And I called Alice and I was like, hey, you want to maybe check this out and see if you don't hate it? And she was like, no, just do whatever you want to do. And I was like, okay. So that's what I did. I got the first, so we premiered it. And it was just the output was totally different. It played out in a forest on this different set of speakers. I mean, we kind of had a last minute shift. Initially, it was just going to be on an iPad or iPod app. So I had to design it as such, and I had to mix it in earbuds because that's how everybody was going to listen to it. And but it was truly, she let me do whatever I wanted to do. She brought me on board, not because I could make someone cry at this moment in a film, because there's really just a formula for that at the end of the day. She wanted me to just make anything that I wanted to make. And that, like, when I realized that, I mean, she had told me that, but when I really realized it, it was such a great moment. It was like, wow, I'm making this because it's my idea, not because I'm trying to serve some preconceived notion that she has about what she wants the piece to be. And so that happened. I don't know, how old is this piece now? 2 years, 3 years? I guess it's like 2 years or so. I guess this summer will be 2 years old. And so after that, I continued to obviously do film stuff, but I was really curious about, and just all the reading I had done, I got hilariously into James Turrell, and just this whole idea of color. And I started to, I've been doing a lot of video editing, nothing really official, but just sort of my own stuff. And I found this editing program that I treated really just like a music program. I mean, when I edit anything, I'm really just editing music in my mind, but it was video. And I sort of by mistake landed on this thing where I had two colors that like shifted into one another. And I was just sort of fascinated by it. I thought, oh my gosh, what is this? This looks so cool. And so then I set out I was writing this bigger piano piece at the time called Memory Dissolve. Um, and I thought, well, what if I made a component? What if I made a visual component to this, and we premiered it in a gallery setting? Because again, I'd been hanging out at museums more. I had just been more in that mindset. The output was not play bass in a bar, or it was not just score the toothpaste commercial and then forget about it. It was, wow, how can we give people an experience? Because I realized when I was playing live, I was creating this moment in time for people to live in and have an experience in. And, how can I push that forward? But more importantly, one thing I learned with the color field thing was, and this is what was amazing, you guys, it happens while I'm not there. So that is rad, because I had to be there for everything. I had to always be, if I'm doing the performance, it's an empty room. I have to set up everything, and then I have to take everything down, and I love it and I'm not against it. But man, to have something happen that I created and I can be asleep and it's like happening and people are experiencing it, that is really cool. So I wanted to start I made this audio visual installation called Memory Dissolve. And the same folks that helped me premiere the music modern procedure for breathing piece, they brought me on board to premiere this at an art festival that we have. And ever since then, all the work I've been doing is sort of it's geared in this direction. It's not necessarily music, and it's not necessarily audio visual installations, but it's how do I create a different kind of experience for people? And that's really what, at this point, I create a lot of different things. I mean, I think when Lauren read off my my bio, or whatever you want to call it, I mean, I almost wish you just said, this is Amos and he makes experiences for people in very different kinds of outputs. So that's kind of where, at this point, and this is where I am. And now I'm talking with you guys. I mean, I got on, I've been talking with Pepe, and we have an interesting idea for a project. So, but my mind started to shift to very different kinds of outputs. And what has become really important to me are the outputs. Before the pandemic happened, my plan last year was to be going places to perform, going places to share installation work. And then I kind of had to just hole up at home. And again, I started to assess the creative debt. I realized I did have about 5 albums worth of things that I wanted to release. And so I thought, well, I'll spend this year in quarantine releasing this music, so on the back end of it, I can forget about it. Because that's the best thing about the creative debt. When you get through it and you release it, it's done. Like all the albums I've put out, I could still be tinkering with them, but thank God that I'm not, because I can think about these new kinds of projects. So, I guess, does anybody, I feel like I'm going to kind of shift to, general creative thought process and things like that. Does anybody have any questions or anything along those lines before we move on? Yeah.
I do. My name's Kaylee.
Hi, Kaylee.
You keep talking about the creative debt, and that's something that personally, as a creator, is really
yeah, it's maddening.
I feel hard right now. What was your process of like assessing what you had built up? Because some things you don't know, like you have, until you're like going through your list and you're like, oh, yeah, I do have a lot more than I. Right. So how did you go about assessing that?
With a piece of paper and a pencil. I think sometimes you have to break stuff down as simple as possible. You take a note card and you write all of it down, and then you sort of circle what's obtainable this year, what's obtainable this month, is anything obtainable today? Like, what can I start working on? Because some of the projects, they're things that I'm not going to get to right now. I don't have, first of all, the knowledge to do them, but second of all, I don't have the funding, et cetera. So I knew those were off of the list. But when it sort of came to, releasing the first album, I knew all it took to do that was me. I didn't need anybody else. I had the music. I just needed to Google, how do I put out an album? And follow that step and make that process for me. So I think, when you are assessing that, don't try to hold it against yourself that you're not making the big project happen. A lot of times it's little projects. And I think the most important thing about the creative debt is when you start to get through little things, you learn from those things that are then going to influence and help better understand the other ones. So I would say, that's kind of a roundabout answer, but taking the most obtainable things, and also to this, assessing it helps you really understand it. Because a lot of times we have note cards and notebooks full of ideas, but they're really abstract, and they're really, when you dive into them more, you realize, wow, this really isn't obtainable right now. I mean, I had an idea for a room with all of these sensors, and you'd wear headphones and you'd walk around, and depending on how many people were in the room, it would change what you're hearing and what you're seeing. I'm not going to do that right now, but I thought I could do that at one point, and then I really looked into it and went, oh, okay, I can't do that, but I can put out a record. I can start to perform live. I can find these other outputs for creation. So Kaylee, I hope that kind of helps. I mean, I'm a huge fan of writing stuff down. I mean, even right now, just for this chat, I've really gotten into note cards. I guess I've hit that point in my life. Yeah.
Do you have ADD? Because that is like the number one thing ADD people have to do. Like that is like when you were talking about pencil and paper, I was like, that's what you get. That's it. That's the list.
Yeah, it's the list, but it's more that as far as do I have ADD, I might. I have no idea. It's not anything. It's not anything I do. Okay, I guess the last thing that I would add to it is you do have to find that focus. And I think you can find focus by whittling down what it is you're going to work on. And again, if you find the most obtainable thing you're trying to create, focus on getting that done. And don't focus on that being perfect. I think that's the biggest thing. None of what you put out is going to be perfect. None of it is you're not going to magically go, oh my gosh, I did it. I made the perfect thing. Because man, listen, if any of you make the perfect thing, you can quit right there, because it's only going to be frustrating moving forward. So I made myself get it finished. I set deadlines. Again, I mean, I mentioned it comes from film, but I love deadlines. If I don't have a deadline, I'm going to meander on the thing forever and ever and ever. But man, if I have a deadline, it's great. I have to make a decision. I have to move on to the next decision. And I really like that. I'm also bad, Kaylee, I'm bad at self-imposed deadlines. I try to make them for myself and they don't happen. So a lot of times, this is what I do. A lot of times I would book, I like shows, or like with Memory Dissolve. I thought about it much longer than I worked on it. All of a sudden I went, oh my God, this thing has to premiere in 2 weeks. I should probably make it now. And so I sat down and I didn't have a choice. I had to show up to install this work. And if I didn't have it finished, I mean, you're done. You can't do that. So I heard, you guys know John Powell. He's a film composer. He scored like How to Train Your Dragon and a whole bunch of DreamWorks movies, a lot of stuff. I really like, he has a lot of really good sayings. One of them is, life is just an ever shifting set of priorities. And that's always stuck with me. But he tells this great story about, he's like, okay, so I have 3 months to score a film. They call me and we do the deal. And then for the first month, I don't do anything. And then the second month, I might wake up and have coffee and think about it some. And then the third month, I won't sleep. And he gets it done. This guy's a massive, wonderful, insane film composer. So he understands his process. And I think, Kaylee, when you're working through the creative debt, you start to refine your process. How do you work? Some people work really well by procrastinating and then hitting it all at once. I kind of do that on a lot of things. I tend to spend a lot of time. I mean, I guess we could sort of talk about, creative process, creative drive kind of stuff. I think I spend more time thinking about projects than I do actually making their final output. I need to be easier on myself. So a lot of times when I'm not having stuff happen, I get kind of bummed. I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't do anything today. It's like, well, I thought about it for 7 hours though. And so, understand everybody's creative process is different. So for me to tell you, like, this is exactly how you go about working through creative debt, that's not doing your creative practice a service at all. In fact, it's doing you a disservice, because I am not you. And you're gonna learn more about how you create. And for me, I need to spend a lot of time improvising on the piano, improvising sounds, improvising thoughts. Like with the project, with the Brain Center that we're kind of headed into, I had to write more on a piece of paper, just random thoughts, like random questions, random things. If you write something down, just see it as at first, see it as a you're totally throwing paint on a wall. You know, I think I used to say, oh my gosh, if I wrote it down, it had to be perfectly well thought out. It's like, that's not true at all. You have to have a way to organize where the thoughts are going and where the ideas are going. And I think that ties back, Haley, the last time to creative debt. And if you start to write it down and you start to say, okay, this project, there's no way I can do this because I need 200 people to make it happen. This project, oh, wow, actually, I could finish this within the next few weeks, and then it's done and I've learned from it. And you're going to give your brain and your thoughts free space to work on those other things. And so, yeah, Kaylee, I hope that is a long answer to your question. Does anybody else have any questions before I move on?
Well, this is a fascinating question. I mean, within, one of the goals of this conversation is, how we can, harness the knowledge in the humanities, with, the arts are included, and neuroscience engineering, which is what we do, right? And I think that what I have learned by talking to people like you and other artists, performers, is that what we should really focus is on the process. So there have been many studies looking at creativity per se, but creativity is it takes time, it changes, evolves, and you really need to look at the whole process, maybe from inception to the completion, and I think what we're trying to capture. And the second aspect is, I think that in terms of creative depth, I think one aspect of that is realizing that you can put an idea into practice by collaboration. So you need to realize whether this is something that I can do myself, or is this something that will require a team. And you mentioned earlier in your talk, teamwork is important for you. You have given some examples of that, and that is something that is really close to what we do. And I give you an example. So in my lab, we have been focusing on reading the brain, through sensors on the scalp, to understand what I call the neural symphony of behavior. And what we are trying to accomplish is to detect intent. So that was the first question. Can we record brain activity and use computer algorithms to detect movement intent from freely behaving people, right? We call this a brain-computer interface, for example. Has different names, and the short answer is yes. We could come to a recipe to do that, and we have been working for many years on this. But then I realized that movement is not only about transporting our body, acting on objects or things like that, but it's also about communicating, and with other people. Is about expressing our emotions, and so on and so forth. So to better understand that, several years ago, I started a collaboration. So that was my question, and I couldn't answer myself. So I collaborate with a faculty from the dance department, because they look at movement not only in terms of the quality of the movement, but also the expressiveness of the movement, what they want to communicate to the public. And so suddenly we have not only intent for action, but we have the expressiveness of the movement, the quality of communicating an emotion or a state of mind to the public. And so that collaboration led me to better understand these qualities or efforts, right? And so that's an example of something I couldn't solve, that when one layer down, deeper on the creative process, and that was also informative, not only for my colleagues from dance, but also for us in neuroscience and engineering. So, and the final point I want to make at this point is that what we see every single minute is just a tiny part of what our brain is capable of doing or has been processing. So there's a lot of subconscious activity that never reaches our frontal part of the brain, that is never put into play. What we see is only those decisions that we have made, that when we win a competition about a multitude of action that that we have at our disposal. So when you are composing, probably when you come to a specific sequence of textures, sound, you know, your brain has already gone through many iterations, tests, and things like that. But we see only the final product. And by reading the brain, we get access to the invisible as well. Right. So we can sort of take that into account. And moreover, we can also take into account the audience, right? If we include, as you mentioned too, the importance of reaction or feedback. Right. You know, if we can make this unconscious activity visible to the audience, we engage the audience in a different level. They are listening or seeing more than what our body can produce by looking at this unconscious part of the brain. So those were a couple of comments to start discussion.
Can I add a comment?
Yeah.
Pepe and Amos, about this very piece of the conversation. Everything that you have shared with us, Amos, is truly the brain of an artist, and lots of commonalities with those of us who are engaging every minute of our day into the creative process. Pepe, one of the interesting things about what you said is that with the brain machine interface, you can read intent. The interesting thing about the work that we did together in Mexico is that one of the things I realized by being in the Yucatan with that ocean feet away from where we were performing was that ocean has memories in my brain, and that I cannot tell you what was going on in my brain that the color of that ocean kept coming back. But that didn't start by me looking at the ocean. That started by me seeing the ocean when I was 20 and the color of that ocean. So the point is that there's so much happening in the brain that when we say, let's measure intent, there's things that are happening that even as artists, we can't comprehend, but that the dots are being connected silently. What I love about this machine brain interface is that we're trying to put a sound to that silence.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll talk for just a second about. I mean, Pepe, do you want me to start talking a little bit about the idea that I'm bringing?
Yeah,
to the table
yeah,
here?
we could go into that. Yeah,
and also too, I think you know, to what you just said as well, Pepe. It's important to find the questions in any new idea, whether even if it's an old idea you have new questions for it, because you know, if we're not asking questions, we're really not doing things that are that new. If something is, there's a Russian filmmaker, Victor Klakovsky, and he mentions, I have one of his quotes here that I liked, and it says if you understand something, forget it. Like, that's not what you need to be working on. And I like that. So I think the more questions that sort of arise in situations, and that's why for me, I think new outputs create new questions. When I score a film, you know, there are questions that are always going to come up, but there's a lot of questions I already know the answers to, so I just kind of do them. So, you know, talking with you and thinking about, you know, a project that, you know, could use this brain, and I think it was referred to as machine brain interface. I've been referring to it as brain computer interface. Is there a specific one of those I need to hone in on?
There are different names, and that can be confusing. Okay. So
is it the same?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's different instantiation of that. You know, a brain computer interface, you know, a brain sensor goes to a computer where the information is transformed some way that you get an output, you know, and through the computer, right? If the computer is replaced by a robot or a machine, that you have a brain machine interface, and or if it is replaced by a prosthetic limb, that you have a neuroprosthesis.
And so that would be a machine.
The general term is neural interface, right? It's something from the external world or even internal that is interface with the brain activity. Now, you mentioned this color sound mapping, that you were focusing, bringing the texture, right, and the melody, So, one interesting question for us is, how do you do that in the domain of sound and brain activity, right? And if you're a physician that focuses or specializes on understanding brain activity, probably you will be using something that's called the scalp electroencephalogram, or EEG. So these are, time series, right, that shows changes in amplitude and in repetition rate from different parts of the brain. And physicians can detect abnormalities, by looking at the EEG, because they have been trained for years at recognizing these abnormalities. And so it would be beautiful if, in addition to the visual domain, we could map brain activity into sound so that they get another type of perception in addition to the visual one, right? Because we have excellent sound processors in our ears and our brain. So that's just a practical example. But really, I think part of the question is how we can use the brain-computer interface to make it possible for ourselves and other people understand better, their thoughts, even when they don't reach the final stage where you see an action or have a feeling or a perception.
Well, and I think what's interesting, the most interesting about it to me, and we've all mentioned this, is the subconscious level of thought that can be read. Or, Pepe, you put it very well in one of our emails. The BCI is actually listening. And so I started to think about it like an AM radio. You'd listen to static, and then you would catch on one thing, and you could sort of, in an AM radio, you could tune it to that frequency, but you're listening into a bit of a void, and then you're making sense of something. And that void can have all kinds of different, obviously, things going on, these subconscious things going on. So, a long time ago, one of the things that I've started to mess around with was this idea of what I refer to as a sound collage, which has to do with, actually, I need to show you guys a little keyboard. Hang on, it's over here in my closet, sorry. Sorry, guys, 100% unprepared, obviously. Okay, so I have this is just kind of the nice visual example. I've had this little keyboard forever. It's called a Nano Controller. And really, this is just a piano. But the more I started to mess with sound, and the more I started to mess with how can I, when I'm playing live, how can I present this sound? I learned about, there's a thing in this program I use called Logic Pro, where I could use a sampler, and I could take any audio that I wanted, and I could map it out. And so I could make it to where when I hit this key, it played at any sound I mapped it to. It could be me saying a phrase, it could be a single sound, it could be a piece of music, it could be anything. I could map something here, I could map something here, I could map something on all of these keys. I could make it do anything. And so then I started doing, the first time I actually performed live was at a film festival. I was asked to do something, do whatever you want. And so I took a whole bunch of pieces of different film scores and I mapped them out on this controller. And I literally just stood up there and just improvised with them. Like, I set them to where if I hit the button one time, it would play the whole sound file, or it would play it as long as I held it down, and everything would play on top of one another. And again, I left that performance going, well, that was cool. And it was really creating a huge sound collage. And that has always stuck with me as long as I can. And that was years and years and years ago when I did that. But this idea of how I can incorporate sound collages into my work, because I think of like the color field piece. I mean, if you think about it, there's this timeline, and there are these different, all of it's being put together in Logic. But how can that be pushed forward? Because the thing is, when I do that, there is a total human element at play. I am deciding, actually, can I share my screen at this point? Okay, let's see. So this is an example of a logic file, okay? Can everybody see this okay?
Yes.
All right, so this is actually starting to work on the project that we're working on, Pepe. This is the first version of that. So, and this is how a logic file works for me. Each of these are usually instruments or sounds. And, you know, as you will see, I've put them, we'll call this the timeline. I have physically placed these things all over the timeline, as you guys can see. And so when I go over here and I hit play, I'm not going to play it because I have a huge problem with how sound comes across. I apologize, guys. It's not good on Zooms. But when I hit play, it will play this back to me. And so I could take this piece, I could scoot it here. I could take this piece, I could scoot it here. Amos is physically in control over how this is going to happen from the minute it starts until I decide it ends. And that's fine, but it's kind of not that interesting to me at this point. This is how I put together film music and commercial music, or if I'm writing music, I use this process because we're working, you know, time as a medium is important to me. And so I do have full control over it. But what I like about this sound collage idea is I'm playing these things then at random. When I'm holding down the button, things are happening at random. I'm not tied into this timeline that I physically have gone in and moved stuff around and made decisions on. So the idea of how can this sound collage concept move forward, that's when Pepe and I started talking and he told me about the brain interface. My thought was, oh my gosh, what if there can be a group of sounds, and again, they're mapped out on the keyboard, but what if the keyboard, and this is, we'll call it, and it's mapped out on the keyboard. Let me share the next slide as well. Okay, so again, these here are our individual sounds. Okay, we have, for this example, we have short sounds and we have medium sounds, and then we have rests, which I can get into later or on Thursday. It's the kind of thing. But as you can see, I have them here, they're mapped out on the keyboard. Does that make sense to everybody? This concept of they are mapped out onto the keyboard. So then when I hit this button, it's going to trigger this sound. When I hit this key, it's going to trigger that sound. And so I thought, well, what if somehow things were mapped out to where you know, the BCI can read our thoughts, and our thoughts become the trigger, and our thoughts become what is triggering, because that then completely removes the human element. Again, if I'm making it in logic, I'm deciding where it goes, it's predetermined. If I'm improvising it on the keyboard, it's still, there's a human element involved. I am touching it. I'm making the decision to do that. But if my subconscious is somehow triggering it, you guys, that is fascinating. And that is so cool. And that changes everything about how this group of sounds, and the group of sounds is, at this point, it's only there as a way to start figuring this out. But this group of sounds is then triggered in a completely different way. So also too, like if I map these out on a keyboard, they see these kind of, they're in groups for the most part. All of our short sounds would happen if I touch these. All of our long sounds would happen if I touch these. And again, our bits of rest, which I will talk about, I promise, they would trigger here. So I've thought about how can I test this idea? How can this happen? Because really what we want is this. We really want this to be more random, and then the collage becomes less understood and more surprising, and at the end of the day, more interesting. If I have everything down on my left hand and all my short sounds go beep, boop, boop down here, I'm going to hear those. It's only going to become so much. What I've been sort of struggling with at this point in understanding this process. So if we have the version in Logic is version 1, totally predetermined by me as a human. This mapping it out on a keyboard becomes test 2, which is fine. What I actually found was the best, I think, example is when I turned the sound off and randomly played and then had it play back to me. So I wasn't being influenced by it. But what I'm really working on right now is actually a program in Max MSP that I put these sounds into, and it does it randomly. And again, guys, this is just for tests, because my end of things as the sort of composer the curator of these sounds, which Pepe has really, he gave me a great term. He said a grammar of sound. We're creating these grammars of sound. I need to see how they work. I need to experience them, because if I'm going to be curating and putting, deciding which sounds are creating this piece, I need to experience them where the human element is as removed as possible. I mean, I had my mom improvise on the keyboard. I've had my kids improvise on the keyboard, and I get the idea. But if our subconscious becomes the keyboard, that's really sweet and totally cool. And that's what I'm trying, that concept is what I'm trying to understand, and trying to, hopefully with you guys and with Pepe, come to just a better understanding of. And, one of the things, this is one of the, I want to show you guys the difference between, actually, maybe I can pull these up at the same time. So
Amos, I just want to make a comment on that.
Oh, yes, please. Absolutely.
Because you mentioned the importance of surprise, right?
Right.
And to keep things interesting. And there are actually a specific area of the brain that is very responsive to surprise, novelty, new things. And it's actually a very strong reward signal. It's a driver of what we do. We look for things that are new, things that are novel, right? And so I think that's very important. I think that there's evidence in neuroscience that it's critical. And when this system fails in some neurological disorders, you see the effect. People start, stop looking for things. There's no effect. They freeze. So it's really a driver. So I think that's interesting. Another concept is that we have different areas in the brain. Areas that are in charge of processing visual stimuli, auditory, we have memory areas, and so on and so forth. And these areas talk to each other, right? So if you think about the brain as being a neural symphony, so to speak, where each player is a brain area, right? That has some preference in terms of the type of output you see from that area. So that provides perhaps some foundation or framework about how you might want to combine these different sounds, and of course some areas take longer to communicate because they are further apart. There are some areas that communicate only through other areas, and there are some areas that are next to each other, so it's very fast. So we could have different time scales on this neural symphony, right? So that's another important. And one question that I think we would like to elaborate is on the sounds itself, right? What do you have in mind in terms of, or could you elaborate on what a sound means to you here? Or what are the possibilities for these sounds? You have short, you have long, and you have rest. And I think we will have a time to discuss more the importance of having these rest periods as well, right?
Oh no, absolutely. Because it hit me one night when I was thinking about this. Do you want me to talk about the rest, or are we going to do that on Thursday? Because it kind of could be totally interesting.
I mean, we can touch on that now to as we prepare for
right. Okay. So the idea of the rests came about also too. I want to show two more quick pictures, because I think it's important to understand the difference between random sounds playing in a collage and sounds playing in a shuffle. So this is an example of sounds playing in a collage, where what that means is they're playing on top of one another. They're playing at the same time. And that's really, really, really important. So you have these short sounds that are being triggered, and then underneath of them or above them, or the layers are really not important right now. But that you have a medium sound that plays out. And when I say medium sound, it's a sound that plays longer than a short sound. And again, guys, too, these are all literally individual sounds. There's no phrases. I'm trying to avoid the idea of melodic phrases or rhythmic phrases. I want the triggering. I want the thoughts that are triggering things to. That's what is creating the patterns. That's what is creating the melodies. So again, this being a sound collage, and this not being a sound collage. So we'd have just a sound that plays, and then another sound that plays, and then another sound that plays. Almost like if you put an iPad on, or a Spotify on shuffle, it's going to go from one song to the next, to the next, to the next. It's not going to play a whole album on top of one another. So I can explain that further more if I need to, but that's a very important part to understand about this sound collage. Because a lot of times if you say you're going to take audio and put it on shuffle or randomize it, that it's going to play 1, then 5, then 6, then 7. I need all those playing on top of one another together at random. So the point of the rests, though, I think most of us have a concept in our head of like, if a little kid goes over to a piano, they just bang on it, right? They just go crazy. And it's great. It's fun. It's lovely. I'm not against it, believe me. But you have to take that into account, is if these can all happen at the exact same time, there's the potential for absolute disaster and a very unenjoyable set of sounds. Now, I have made this initial grammar of sound that I've created. Anything can play with anything else. It all works together. There's not like, oh, we got to avoid combination this and this. They can all be combined. But I was reading a book, and it was talking about Miles Davis and Picasso, and Miles Davis talking about a solo and how the notes are not nearly as important as the rests before the notes. You have to, if you don't have silence, you don't create any sort of anticipation. So it hit me, if we're creating these individual sounds, we also need to somehow inject space, or we need to inject rests into this collage. So if things are happening at random, occasionally you'll get a 1 second or a 2 second or a 5 second rest that's just enough to create some space. And again, I'm just testing. I mean, this is all totally in the test phases. But I think the rests are so key and so important to this not just being a massive wall of sound and too crazy. And again, I'm all for walls of sound. I'm all for craziness. I'm all for stuff being sort of nuts musically. But I also think it's important at this point to create something that is desirable, because though we may love craziness, we sort of desire a break every now and then. So it's an interesting thing to add these rests in here. And these examples I made the visuals of, it only has shorts, mediums, and rests. I mean, the grammar of sound actually has shorts, longs, mediums, and then low. And I think it has low end stuff. I may have taken that out at this point because I didn't like it. But again, we're making these, it's almost like making a bunch of little puzzle pieces that can be put together in any way. And is it possible to tie those puzzle pieces, and they're triggering our thoughts being things that trigger that. And I was thinking too about, I had my daughter play this the other day, and it was cute. She just hit the same note I had the keyboard laid out, and she just hit the same note over and over again. And I thought, okay, that's fine. And I thought, well, what if she's doing that because she hears this again. This is that. We have that human physical interaction with this. And so she hears it and she keeps hitting it because she's hearing it. If I had the sound turned off, she probably wouldn't keep hitting the same thing. So that just then got me thinking, man, what if they're thinking a certain thing, they hear a certain thing, they continue to think that thing, and they actually end up creating that same trigger happening over and over again. I don't even know if that's possible, but the more I have gotten into this project, the more sort of just fascinated I am by the complexity of it, because I've had to think about it for about 4 weeks to even be able to talk about it at all. I had to sort of just limit my time thinking about it, because it became so overwhelming of the, how do I stick with the initial thought? Because I'm really bad about going, cool, I have a thought, and then I have 15 more versions I want to do, and I don't just stay with the first version. So I'm trying to be very tunnel vision right now with the initial concept. And also too, I should note, I'm focusing on sound right now. I also, there's another component of this that I see as a visual, the grammar of visuals as well. But at the end of the day, if the architecture and the blueprint is built for the sound, it could really be transferred over to the visuals. So
no, I think I think this brings this concept of neurofeedback. So you have a BCI that is controlling this collage, right? To the extent that you want to to be in the loop and continue to receive the same type of stimulation, then you're not be repeating the same key, right? So it's a neurofeedback.
Right. I mean, if that's possible, again, I don't even know. When my daughter sat there and just played the same key, I was like, hey, cool. I wonder how, again, I'm seeing the keyboard now at this point as thoughts. Is that sort of thing even possible? It looks like someone may have a question, or if we want to take questions or continue to hear me chat.
Well, I think, let's take a question.
Hi.
Unmute yourself.
Yeah, my name is Yash. I'm a current freshman at the University of Houston.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Honestly, this is all really fascinating to me. I'm like nowhere I'm a finance major, so I'm not even anywhere close to being an engineer or anything. But my passion has always been understanding the brain and understanding how the brain works, because I think it's absolutely astonishing that like we have this computer inside of ourselves. And I guess my question is, so I'm not, I know you all are probably familiar with like the default mode network of our brain. And I was just wondering, as we grow up, as we evolve that part of our brain and we learn, like we listen to certain sounds and we like certain music, have you guys at all like, researched about how people grow up liking certain music and how the BCI can maybe map that out? Because I know certain parts of our brain light up when we like music, and when we don't like music, there's certain parts, like I saw a brain scan that showed a red part of our brain when we don't like music, and then a green part of our brain when we do like music. And I was just wondering, has there been any research or anything about like how we evolve into liking certain types of sound, or how we like, I guess just, how we like certain types of sound, and
So that this is a very interesting question, and indeed there have been studies on preference, be art, be sound, or music, and other qualities. But these are normally done in very standardized groups of people, right, of certain age or group, right? I don't think I have seen any developmental study, looking at how you develop that preference, or even in children, or how they develop their own preference. I think that would be an interesting question. There's several networks in the brain. The default network, is an example, and it seems that is modulated by disease, modulated by age, and other factors. So that would be interesting question, and I think that also relates to probably to the background activity. So you consider that our brain, even during sleep, even when you are isolated, right, the brain is still active. There is some resting state activity, and that resting state activity is modulated by external stimuli or by internal, like memories and or feelings, perceptions, right? And so it makes really very good sense that, in terms of what Amos is proposing, having different type of sound and this rest, and during these rest periods, we anticipate, we try to fit in, what's next. Humans like to make predictions. Like to predict the next outcome. We like to predict other people's actions, right? And so it makes sense that this rest of state, by having different durations, right, that it could sort of build, expectancies, and those expectancies may lead to match or a mismatch, right? When something new comes in, when you're surprised. And so I really like that idea. But thank you for your question.
No, honestly, thank all of you, because this is so fascinating. This is awesome.
And by the way, there's a whole field that is called neuroeconomics, right? So business and neuroscience, right? We have centers in the brain that are responsible for that, right? It's reward. Everything is about reward, right? We do things for reward, short term, long term.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Absolutely. I think a lot of this, I'm I'm learning a whole lot more in this project that I'm actually bringing to the table. I promise. It's all pretty fascinating to me as well.
You know, Amos, I really I see a lot of similarities, you know, and questions. So I think it's a really excellent match. You know, I mean, you started with emphasizing the importance of process, right? The depth of that process. You know, how you visualize these thoughts, these ideas, going through the ideas, I mean, this is what the brain does, right?
Right.
And so I think that an importance of feedback to proceed, make decisions. So I think I'm very happy that although we have different languages, different grammars, we are trying to map them to the other so we can understand.
Well, yeah, I think it's one of those things too. There's as incredibly complex as it is, I do think there's a simplicity to this does this because of this. I'm not saying I understand that yet, but I'm getting closer to, again, that's why I've had to focus on this whole mapping on a keyboard, and then I push the keys down and it triggers the sound. And then how is that, you know, I'm seeing the BCI as it's a new way to trigger the ideas, which, and again, since we're being able to tap in to the subconscious, I mean, I think I get to that level and then my brain just goes, oh my gosh. And then I'm just excited about that possibility. It's sort of, you know, it's like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the composer John Cage, but he has, I think it's called, and I'm not by any means a John Cage aficionado, but he has, I think it's called chance music. And you take a bunch of possible pieces of music and you throw them on the ground. And then you play whatever's laying on the ground in whatever order. And so, you know, I think that this idea of randomization is nothing, it's nothing new, but the output that this collaboration has the potential for is, to me, it's just, it's fascinating. Like it really takes, again, I'm trying to test this by taking the human element out of it as much as I can. Because I think because I need to still expect, like, how, as the composer, I need to hear it. You know, I need to listen to it. I need to listen to it and find out where the problems are, what needs to be added, what needs to be taken away, if those rests are even necessary. You know, there's all kinds of tests, and I can only test them so much. I do think this program I'm working on with a friend, using it's called Max. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It's something I've always wanted to use and have never found a project for it, but this is a perfect project. And again, it's just for testing. Max isn't to be put into play, but it can help me as I'm creating these things. It can help me hear them in the most realistic way, because as long as I have a human interaction with it, and even in Max, there's some parameters I want to control as far as time duration, how many samples can play at once, or how many audio files can play at once. So there is a human element, but I would love to be able to step away and hit go, and it would play infinity. And would just constantly, you know, it's not on a sequence, it's not on a loop. It is truly on as random as it can be with some basic parameters. So, you know, I'm incredibly intrigued by the output for this kind of thing.
So one question that you posed in our correspondence was, whether thoughts have different duration.
Right.
Right.
Because I think that's important.
Yeah, and they do. I mean, some take more time, more information to sort of evolve and reach consciousness. Some do not, right? But if we consider these sounds as potential triggers for thoughts, memories, right? And maybe it's the collage, no individual sound, but the collage is what triggers, memories, right?
It starts to compound on itself, because when you're listening to it or seeing it, you are your thoughts are then influenced by what your thoughts are, and that's pretty cool. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but yeah, if that loop has,
and that may take some more time in some people, or for some thoughts, right? That's part of the no randomness, but this is a highly dynamic process, right? And so.
You know, and another thing you've mentioned multiple times, this is sort of a neural symphony. You know, one thought I wrote down while we were talking was, and I haven't thought of this until now, but let's say you have three people that have or that have the BCIs on, different ones.
Yeah.
One of them gets short sounds, one of them gets medium sounds, and one gets long. And so then you have three different sets of thoughts that are creating what is being heard using those, different short, long, medium grammars. So, yeah.
Right. So you could engage a group or the audience in, you have the machine, right, that has this grammar built in, right, and some rules, and then you have the brains that have control of the machine, and it's always dynamic, it's always changing. You mentioned also, I mean, you are a filmmaker, right? That you work
right.
with, you score films and all
yes.
that. And I see film making or films as related to memories, right? And be past memories, be current working memories, the things happening at that time, or putting yourself in the moment or in the future when you're trying to, imagine what would happen. And so I see this collages like, selecting different movies in your memory, right? That come and go.
You're doing that, but then you're actually while you're selecting from past and thinking from future, you're creating something in the now that is influencing both sides of that as well.
Right. Now, and we will have more time to discuss the next session, but it would be great if we could sample the sounds that you are producing, right? That you are generating.
Of course, I mean, I can send you the sounds. That's of course, right. Yeah.
Right.
I had only gotten it to this point just for this part of the conversation.
Right, and so this can be studied in at least two different ways, right? So let's say in a open loop manner, right? So you have a person with headphones, right? And you measure brain activity. The brain activity is playing, right, your machine, and we study, how that we study the brain response to that music, right?
Right.
And so to characterize, what is the brain response of person A versus person B,
sure,
right? But then we can also look at the closed loop, what happened over time, right? How a particular collage has an effect on your own brain activity and selects the next collage, right? So, it's gonna be changing, right?
Yeah.
And you can add more people to that, right? That you have 2 or 3 people that are also affecting, your perception, right? It's not only your brain activity, it becomes a social network, right? When you have more than one person in the picture.
Well, that was kind of my thought of having different people with different sets of grammars, but they're listed, they're experiencing the thing in the same time.
Right.
And, and then if you were to switch those up, how it would be different. So, I think it does. Again, I've tried to stay very tunnel vision on version like 1.0, just to understand it, just to get to the point where it makes enough sense to even have this conversation. And the fact that we can talk about it this long is good for me. It means I'm at least thinking in the right direction.
I think there's a question from Lauren. Lauren, you want to?
Yeah, sure. So, noticing going to see outside in person on the campus, I was noticing there are a lot of other sounds kind of coming in and out of the space. There are birds, there are cars, there are people walking. You can of course hear the composition, but it mixes sometimes with the other sounds that are there. And I was just curious, is that an element of randomness? Or something that's not controlled that you considered when you were creating that piece?
I think there's probably more other like outside sound coming in for you guys, because initially the piece was initially written and was going to be presented you'd wear headphones to hear it. Like when I wrote it, the thought was people are in headphones, and it's just really quickly, it's called Outside In because there were 2 different versions, because the way that this the exhibition worked at the museum, there was a large portion of it outside, but then there was a portion of it inside. And so my thought was, if you started outside and you walked inside, what if you started out inside and walked outside? So there's another version of it that actually plays in the reverse order, and you experience it differently. I liked the beginning of the one that's playing at Houston. I think that's a good beginning. At this point, it plays on such a long loop, it probably didn't even feel like there's a beginning or end, which I love, and it's fascinating. But no, I didn't, because originally we were in headphones. I didn't worry too much about outside sound. And then when we broke it out of headphones and put it in the forest, it was in a pretty deep forest away from the road at the museum. And it was set where you walked around this path, and it only played a certain time of the day. And each piece you hear actually only played on one speaker. So you had to walk around to sort of experience it. You guys are getting it in a bit of a, I would say, more traditional way, like you're hitting play on it, but you are getting those sounds. You're getting birds, you're getting cars. I think you could probably get a little in the weeds if you try to calculate that kind of thing in, because how can you? I was doing part of when this premiered at Crystal Bridges, I had to also play a show, and we have a James Turrell Sky Space up there, and I played in the Sky Space. And I wasn't like trying to play the color filled piece, but I was using elements from it. And at one point I remember an airplane going over, and the frequency of the airplane, I was playing just really nice ambient, quiet meditative stuff. And the sound of the airplane mixed with it made what I was playing sound awful. It was very strange. Like it went from being this nice thing to, while that airplane was going over, the tone it injected ruined everything that I was playing. And I couldn't do anything about that. I just thought it was funny. I didn't have a problem with it. But I think you can go, oh my gosh, what if an airplane goes over? And what if a truck passes? And what if its horn is this note? And that, I can't get into that, because like, I can't control that.
I want to follow up on that, on Lauren's question, because Herlina mentioned that when she was performing in Cancun, that the water, the memory of water and the color of the water were important drivers. Right. And we can talk about a grammar of natural sounds, for example, also artificial sounds. I wonder, what would be, well, there would be a space for that. If you play, for example, the waves breaking, right, on the Riviera, right, that may elicit some specific memories, right, some people anyway. You play a bird, you play a waterfall, or you play, a crash, right? So those are cues that may open gates in the brain so that your memories come back. Of course, sounds, music does that as well. But I wonder if in your process right now, just thinking about this, whether you have considered using natural sounds as opposed to other type of sounds.
I think at this point I have not, just because I really have tried to focus on understanding the very basic version of this, as opposed to, like, I would consider that version sort of the next level thought of it. I'm almost more worried about the blueprints and the architecture of it, because I think if the architecture works and the blueprint is possible, then we can start to go, okay, cool. Now, what if we did add in birds? What if we added in, the sound of someone singing a song very off in the background? You start to manipulate things a little bit in that manner. But if the architecture and the blueprint doesn't work, that's irrelevant.
Right. So yeah, this sounds like
I've had to.
Yeah, it's really a roadmap. Right.
Yes, the roadmap has to, and also too. I mean, I started to think about other versions a little bit, but I don't want to. I need to continue to. That's why also too, I need to hear it. I'm trying to. How do you, if your subconscious can trigger these sounds, how in the world can I, as a human physical being that's touching stuff, replicate the concept? It's almost impossible. So that's why I'm still trying to understand how I can even test it on my own.
Right. So I think one question that we ask ourselves in science, what are the basic units, right? Okay. So this grammar has some units, right? And some rules, right? And you are talking about that. You're talking about how this should be mixed, well, to some extent, right?
Right. I want it to be as interesting as possible. And I mean, I can't, at the end of the day, I mean, we even talk about, oh, music's only 12 notes. It's like, well, really, it's only 7 notes before it gets crazy. And so how how can you live within, there's a thing a long time ago I used to play with called a tone matrix, and you can like Google tone matrix and this thing comes up, and it's so much fun to play with. It's just a sequencer, it's a grid, and you can click any square on it and it plays in the sequence, and it's such a great tone that they picked for this thing. I think that's why I like it so much. But you can fill up the whole grid and it's going to work. It's going to play together. And when I've made these sound collages and thought about this stuff, you have to take that. I mean, you could step out of the box and make something very, very atonal, and that's fine, but it's not appealing to an extent. I'm not against atonality, but I also too, I don't want to sit in a room and listen to tritones. Even though I do like Johnny Greenwood like way too much, and I want to create something that is sort of I think our brain state, our thought processes, perhaps are more honest and real if we're in a comfortable place. And then if it veers from there, that's fine. But the initial thing I feel like needs to make is be as pleasant as I want to sit here and continue to go, oh, that's nice. I don't want to go, oh, wow. I kind of do personally, me sometimes with certain songs and sounds, but generally I'm trying to make this as, interesting as possible for just the random, my kids. If I play it I want my kids to go, oh, what is that? I don't want them to go, what are you doing?
Great. Well, this has been fascinating. It's 11:29. So thank you, Amos, for this conversation. I think
absolutely.
We put together some of the main questions, challenges, and and also I think the impact of this is clear. And so I will encourage everybody to register again for the next session. So you get a new Zoom link, I believe, for Thursday at 10.
I'll be there.
And it will be more interactive next time, because now we have the beginning of a blueprint, and we will inject the engineering part of that. Try to make it happen, right? So
right.
Any questions that for anyone? Thank you, Lauren, for putting the information on the chat. So thank you, Amos. So I will be in touch to prepare a little bit for next session.
Absolutely, and I will. In short, I'll send you the grammar as it sits now, and I'll talk to you about how to send that to. But yeah, does anybody else have any questions on this before we jump off?
I have a question, but I don't know if you have time. Or
go ahead.
Yeah, actually, no. Thank you for the session, right? So I sort of summarize combining a few things that you mentioned, right? You talked about John Cage. It was actually one of the. I went to Manila. There was this. He had this collaboration over there exhibit where I think it was John Cage and Domenico Grimmer. The two exhibits sort of came together. I think that was one of my favorite piece a lot of time. And I one of the questions I sort of asked is, would this have worked equally well if it was some random other music, right? Like whether the two of them do they have to be played together, or can it be any other music? Would that have the same experience for me, right? So when we talk about when you talked about having the collage aspect of it and having a randomized thing, I was just wondering, would that also have this issue of conflict, or this might not really be what I really want to hear, right? This randomness, would that actually cause a conflict in how we perceive the two together?
That's I think where my current design process is with it. How can what I present, how can it happen in any imaginable way and still work? And it's not that hard to do that. You just play everything in C. It's really simple. It's all white keys. And if you have any low notes, they need to be a certain thing, so there's not a clash. So, and again, trying to make a basic version of this right now. I am trying to design it. I really go check out that tone matrix too, I mentioned, because it's a good example of like how you can have a whole bunch of things that randomly happen, but they work together. So, right now I am trying to make something that it's flawless in its ability for it to, they could all play all at the same time over and over and over again, though you get bored of it, it's going to work. You're not going to hear anything that's too off-putting. Does that answer your question?
Yes. So, but I guess in that, do we still need to, we sort of need to identify things that work together. Is that correct? Am I correct in?
Yeah, I mean, let's see. Are you asking if are we trying to make something that all does work together? Is that what you mean?
The modules that we combine, right? Like so would we have to be careful in selecting those or any
No.
sounds?
At this point, any sound, the grammar, I'm seeing what I'm working on now is a single sound grammar with a bunch of things. We don't have to worry about them.
I see.
I think what could get interesting down the line is, let's say you have a certain set of a pattern of a short, a medium, and a long, and that happens twice. Well, because that happened twice, now something else specifically is going to happen that we create and that we sort of dictate. There's an algorithm. After 4 short sounds, it's going to play blank. But I'm not there yet. Like that gets deeper.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I hope that answered the question.
Any other questions? In that case, well, thank you again, Amos. Thank you, everybody, and we will meet again next Thursday at 10, and we will start the brain-computer interface for sonification, right, of neural activity, and try to find some solutions, solve some challenges, and demonstrate this. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful day, everybody. I will see you guys on Thursday.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks again, Lauren.